Welcome, folks. Today, the topic that we are going to take a look at is named Pain Demystified. The idea behind the talk today is to understand what pain is, how it expresses itself, and if there is anything we can do about it. It's a vast topic, but we are just going to touch upon some of the relevant points. And as we'll see, this is not really from a medical standpoint, but more from how a pain exhibits itself in our mental space. So in general, there are several kinds of pains, but in general, there are at least two different kinds of pain. So there is physical pain that when the body gets hurt in different ways. And then there is emotional pain that one encounters when there is some disrespect shown to us or somebody insults us. In terms of the physical pain, when our toe stubs against a stone, we feel pain. There is the very common toothache, headache, and that we know these kind of pains very well. So there's a wide array of sources of pain that inflict us. Now, the one thing that we will try to understand in this entire study or entire walkthrough session is there's a difference between the pain and suffering. The effect of pain is suffering. And we'll see why this subtle difference makes important point in our handling of pain. So the pain that one experiences, we want to see if there is some common denominator. As in, although I might have a pain in my tooth or in the head or the emotional pain, do they take place in the same place? And our experience of pain, is it working in the same way? So generally, if we go to a doctor with some kind of ailment, there is this question that gets posed often that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain do you feel? And then they do some work, and then they would ask us again to understand whatever they did, if it's working or not, to assess the pain again. So if we were to have this kind of a scale, then depending on the kind of experience we are going through, we will assign some value to the pain that we are experiencing. So maybe, between a toothache and a sprain in my ankle, there is a difference. The ankle doesn't pain as bad. And the headache is more painful than the toothache. And we can have some arbitrary classification of the pain based on our experience. And in fact, right from this point onwards, the word experience itself is very fuzzy, and it's unclear exactly what takes place and how pain becomes experienceable for us in a certain dimension. That itself, it starts getting fuzzy. We'll try and see if we can talk about this a little bit more. And then there is pain that is not physical, but we might be able to place that on this same scale, thereby implying that there is probably some common denominator where all this pain is experienced. And we will try and understand if this mechanism of expressing pain is something that could be understood. So there is a definition of pain I have put together with cherry-picked words that we will look into to understand how this whole mechanism of pain builds and one experiences. So the definition goes thus, that pain is an undesirable change in my apparent self. So the word is apparent word is deliberately put in brackets because without that word too, this sentence makes sense that if I have got some undesirable experience, so I have got a cut on my skin, it is undesirable, and I will feel the pain and I will suffer. And so it is as if that the word apparent may not be required here. So we will understand why that word is of so much significance. It's very significant why that word happens to be there. So we'll take one by one the words that appear in this definition. And this is, when you read this definition, it's not something extraordinary. It's not a complicated thing. It is something we experience in our day-to-day life with this sentence. Nothing out of the world in this sentence. So the first thing we want to say is change. So change, there is constantly there is change taking place in the universe. The very fabric of this cosmos is change. If there were no change, this cosmos would cease to exist. And there is different degrees of relativity, different orders of reality in which this change occurs. So we can look at a rock and think that it is not changing. It has been there for 1,000,000 years. But upon analysis, we know that it is made up of atoms and electrons, and they are held together by certain bonds, and that state of vibration is actually generating the energy that holds this rock together in the place that it is. Nevertheless, this change that is there is going to give rise to a very obvious effect, which is we would have a desirable change and we would have an undesirable change. I guess one might say that there could be changes that we don't really are affected, neither desirable nor undesirable. In fact, that is kind of where we would like to be, but we have to be careful when we make this sentence statement and qualify it with the proper adjectives. So the change that is there is going to induce this undesirable or desirable. And in general, desirable things are something, as the word implies, we desire, we want them. We want a big house, we want a good job, we want a good car, we want a better car, things that we desire. We want an ice cream, we want a good bed. So these are changes that we want in our life, which we desire. They are desirable. And then things that we do not want. I do not want a toothache. I don't want a headache. I don't want my car to have a flat tire, and so on and so forth. So in our definition of pain, this is very obvious now where we are going, that a change where the outcome is something undesirable is what is the cause of pain. So what is this apparent thing? So before that, our whole life is this crazy race where we go towards desirable and we run away from what is undesirable. The fact of the matter is that the things that we desire, they are things, objects that give us or from which we draw pleasure. And the interesting fact of life is that pleasure and pain are the obverse and reverse of the same coin. So if there is an object which is giving us pleasure at one point in time, then by the inexorable law of change, a time would come when it would undergo such a change where it will become something undesirable and it will end up in pain. And although this seems like a very complicated statement, it's as simple as we get a car, it's a new car, and it gives us pleasure. We look at it, you open the window and the doors and of your home, you glance through your blinds from your home and you see the car and it fills you with pleasure. This very pleasure, the reverse of it is if the car gets a dent, then this car is going to give us, this car will become a source of pain. So pleasure and pain, they are the obverse and reverse of the same coin. Now the question is, so is there a way to get around it? What is, if we make a statement based on this, okay, so let's stop going towards things desirable, that let's not get involved in them, and then we will not have to worry about pain as well. It's kind of true, but it sounds very dry and it sounds like something that uh, may not be possible the way we work in life. We are passionate about things and that's what gives us pleasure. So what this car example, this is a important example because we want to stick to it since it is a simple example for analysis, but good enough that it will help us understand other kinds of pain that we experience. This example, the example of this car, is especially interesting because the pains that we looked at earlier, the toothache, the headache, the insults, the disrespect, the grief. Grief is a very big source of pain. It's a different kind of pain, and we'll see why it is. It impacts us so drastically, so much so that our faculty of reasoning also is stunned at times. When we lose somebody close to us, it happens. Our brain stops functioning. We cannot reason properly. So it has got a very significant impact on our life. So the pains that we saw, we can somewhat relate to because they are our very own. It is my tooth that hurts. It's my head that hurts. It's my insult that took place. But the car is an object that's outside my body. It is really not me. But yet it has been a source of pain to me. It induces, it inflicts, of course, based on the change, the undesirable change that it has gone through, it inflicts pain on my being. So if I were to plot this on the pain scale, maybe it comes way down. It's less than a toothache. Maybe it is at a level 1 or a 2 where it hurts us a little. But we know very well how relative this is. If I have a car that is 15, 18, 20 years old, and it has got, I don't know, 180,000 miles on it, and it's breaking down here and there, and then it has a dent, my pain scale, it might just cause a blip on my pain scale. But if I bought a brand new Cadillac, it's standing there, it's the first day, I've just driven it 2 miles, and then I find a dent on it, the pain scale will be way above whatever it is. So it's car object. It is just a car. It is not even me. It is sitting out there, and yet it gives me grief. It is the source of pain for me. So how do I justify this? What is happening here? How do I explain the pain that it is causing? So maybe it is related to the dollar amount, the money that I have spent on it. But we know it's not just that, because supposing that is not the case, supposing somebody is taking care of all your money problems that are related to this, even then we are in pain. So why is that? So the next step that we want to check is, how is the mind working with this car object? And the most important thing to take away in this analysis is, this car which was in the showroom, and it was just a car, right? It was a car, people used to come watch it and go away, and make some, try and understand the technical details of it and whatnot. And then it got narrowed down to specific interest, and it became the car. This is the car that I'm interested in. And the next step in this series of evolution is that it becomes my car. I pay the money and I get it. Now this same car, the car became a car, became my car. So this transition of the car with these different articles that we have to my car, where my, in the English language, there is the pronouns I and my. I is a personal pronoun and my is a possessive pronoun. So we possess that object. So this mind, or the way our mind works, is it took this object and made my own, and therefore I am calling it now as my car. But even though we call this, there is still something else going on. It's not just the fact that I bought it. There's something else that's going on. So what is going on here? So what happens is that the mind, it is kind of focused on this object, and this object sits outside the domain of the mind. If we were to draw a hypothetical circumference around the scope of where our mind can go to, this object of car is sitting outside the mind. And the mind now is focusing on this object. And a time will come when the mind, figuratively, maybe even literally, becomes one with the car. It's like an amoeba. If you have seen how an amoeba goes and devours its prey, the mind goes and makes this part of itself. Now, the mind can do this because it functions in a different dimension. It does not got any physical appearance. It has got no length. It has got no breadth. The pace at which it operates is inestimable. We cannot know, but it is everywhere. It You think of something and it's there. So it metamorphoses that space and it makes the car mine. What does that mean in straight English language? When this mind becomes that car, what does it mean? It means that a phenomenon of identification has taken place, which is, in other words, this car is me, to put it in plain English. This is what has happened, that it is not something out there, but it is me, myself. This car is not something different. It is me. And therefore, when there is a dent on that car, this in fact is a wound that has inflicted on myself, on me. It is as if I have got the scratch. Now, depending on the bonding that is there, and this is not a physical bond, it's something abstract, but depending on this bonding that is there between the object that the mind is working on and the mind, it is going to precipitate that kind of pleasure and subsequently pain. It's not just pain that you get, it's pleasure too. So the mind, when it becomes that object, it also derives a lot of pleasure from it. But the unification of the mind with this object is something that has occurred kind of subconsciously. So the mind, it it has become this object that it is working with, and this has got very far-reaching consequences. There is a there's a lot of other information or study that can go around this, but we are dealing with a very specific vertical, the pain that the mind works with. So the mind, when it does this, it takes an object and it makes it one with itself, where identification takes place. The same thing, we are going to take this example and we are going to turn it around or just apply it this time to the different senses of the body. Now here, this is a very big topic, but I'm going to summarize it in a very short form. So we say the two pronouns that I mentioned or alluded to a little while ago, there is I and then there is my. I is a personal pronoun and my is a possessive pronoun. So if I were to say that the car, when the car, my car has a dent, if I were to say I have got a dent, it would seem very ridiculous. It would seem unreasonable. The statement will not make sense. So the statement, it will not make sense. It will, we will dismiss that as something irrational. But look what is happening here. Watch this piece of reasoning, this logic carefully, and it is really a remarkable thing that we as a human being have gotten ourselves into. When we use this pronoun, the I and the my, we are we are demonstrating a state of great confusion, of a state of chaos. So when I say that I have a toothache versus when I say that my tooth is aching, it is as it is as irrational for me to say that I have a dent. When my car has a dent, I say I have a dent. And I am saying that this statement doesn't make sense. It's irrational. But I say my tooth is having a pain and I transfer that onto myself and I say I am having a toothache. So by making these two statements, I am demonstrating that there is a state of confusion here. And this is a very big topic, but nevertheless, even to acknowledge that this state of confusion persists or exists is itself a good entry point into a self-introspection exercise. That what is happening here? Is it the fact that I am really in pain, Or is it the fact that something else is in pain and I am transferring that attribute to myself? So the fact that this has happened, the car, the car example where we were talking about this phenomenon of identification taking place, where I have thought or I think that I have become this car. This car is not something outside of me, not different, but it is me itself. The same thing has happened for the tooth. I have been somehow led to believe that this tooth is not something outside or different, but it is me itself. Who can deny this experience? Everybody goes through this experience. So how do you reconcile this statement? Well, the fact of the matter is that there are two things happening here, that there is pain and then there is suffering. Now, without getting too much into the detail of exactly what is happening, medically wise, the pain part of it, this separation between understanding the object being different that is subject to the pain and the suffering that takes place on account of that pain, to be able to differentiate that. The the fact that this because of this identification of this body with the car has taken place far more intimately with the tooth, with the body. So therefore, in this picture, we have shown the different senses of the body itself. We make this clear-cut distinction. When we say that I am having a toothache, if we are able to make that correct and say that this body is having a toothache, if we are able to get to that state of clarity and say that, there is one other point that I wanted to mention here, and we cannot get into too much of detail, but I nevertheless wanted to make that statement that I can shift this blame of pain onto a different entity here. I would say that it's not I who is having the pain, but the head which is hurting. It is not I who is having the sprain, but it is the ankle. So we know that unfortunately, in battles, in war, there are soldiers who lose their limbs. And there is a weird phenomenon that takes place that the limb that that person has lost, they feel pain in that limb. And it takes a long time for doctors to be able to get the person to a state where he accepts and understands the fact that the limb is lost and the pain is not there. This is a similar exercise that this is outside of me, this is the body. But this statement that we think we may be able to make, how do I explain this when I say I am happy or I am sad? We can shift the blame when I say I have a toothache to the tooth and say it is not me, it is the tooth which is aching. And so maybe I have got a way to go around this. But when I say I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm in distress, I'm in despair, I'm depressed, where do I lay the blame in this case? And the answer is, in this case, it is the mind. And if we make this statement, it brings up a lot of other things. Do you mean to say that we are not the mind? Well, yes, that is exactly what we are saying. And there is a lot of logic and a lot of reasoning that we can use with ample amount of evidence to support this statement. But like I said, we are not going to get into too much of details of this. our point is that his pain occurs at a different juncture in this whole cycle. And I need to be able to understand this and see what I can do about it. Also, the pain that I experience and the suffering on account of that I go through is having a direct significance or a direct link to the degree of minus of that object. So if a different car has having a dent, not my car, I don't feel pain, I don't feel bothered. If another person is having a toothache, it's not my tooth, I don't feel that ache. So this degree of minus, if I have a shirt that I'm wearing that is of not of much value to me, doesn't cause me that much of pain compared to a shirt that I value more. Therefore, if I am able to make this kind of a statement now, that I can, similar to a pain scale, I can do a minus scale. So this is not minus as in the algebraic operation minus. This means my possessiveness. If this bonding that I have, the stronger the bond that I have with an object, the more painful the experience is going to be when that object changes into an undesirable or undergoes a change, an undesirable change, which is inevitable. We said that the nature of the cosmos is such that change is inevitable and a point will come when it will undergo an undesirable change. And if at that point my bonding with this object is that intense, my pain is going to be of equal proportion, probably even more so. Now, having said this, is there a way for us to understand, eh, for us to be able to do something about this? So this pain that occurs with inside or with things or objects that are outside of my being. This statement, it needs to be understood, reflected upon, practiced. It's not an easy thing. It takes a while. But by a change of attitude towards looking at pain, if I can go to the next slide over here. If we are able to develop within us this attitude, which will help us put a distance between me and these other objects. And upon self-introspection, upon analysis of this, when we try and find out what is it that sits in the domain of my, and what is it that is sitting in the domain of I. So if I were to take a compass and draw a circle with the I, with the radius of what I means, and a radius of what my means. So there are places where this circle is going to intersect with each other. And that is where the I and the my things become fuzzy. Sometimes we say this, sometimes we say that, so it's not clear. And we have confused ourselves. We have deluded ourselves. Delusion is a very interesting word from the English dictionary. It means that we believe in something when we have evidence to the contrary. Delusion versus illusion. In delusion, we have evidence that what we are saying is not correct, and yet we continue to believe that. And what what has happened is this process of bonding between this object and the mind. It starts out slow and it builds up over time, and it starts getting stronger and stronger. And then it it gets to a point where it becomes extremely difficult to break this bonding. And that is what has happened between us and this body. That it's to make a statement that we live inside the body appears to be correct, but really it's that statement is undefined. We The dimensions of space and time don't really apply to the mind. It just has a different domain in which it operates. So the contemplation process where we are able to put the distance between I and my, when we start analyzing this, pick anything. And if I say I know it, the minute I say that, then that implies that that is not me. That object that is under study, I might come to know it, I may not come to know it, but it is not me. So I look at a flower, it has got some very complicated structure inside of it, and I don't understand the structure, but the fact that it is an object that I can think about implies that it is outside of me. And if we keep doing this analysis, anything that we pick and say what this is, and if we know it, or even our eyes, there is no way for our eyes to see themselves. That there is no way. The only evidence that we have for uh, our eyes is that they that we are able to see. That is the only evidence. So we do this analysis, and I'm going to jump to some. We are almost like taking a leap to where this is going to potentially lead. But this circle of I, if we keep doing this analysis, we are soon, well, not soon, but eventually we'll arrive at a point where it will become impossible to for us to understand the radius of this, and the circle is going to simply disappear into a point, which means that everything that is there, or this whole world, can be divided into two things: I and everything else. And this I that is there is really not affected by anything else, unless there is this confusion of identification that takes place. So we will leave it at that for today. And in some other talk,